Hey friends, believe it or not, the fall is almost here and I figured it was time for some cozy illustrations. I've also been feeling like I'm in a little bit of an art rut and this is my attempt on helping us get the artistic ball rolling again. So grab a cozy drink, some fun pens or markers, and let's get started. As today's prompt is just fall themed items, I figured the first thing that we should draw is a mug because who's not drinking a cozy drink during fall, am I right? Also, I'm trying to challenge myself here and not sketch it beforehand with a pencil, as this is my usual process. If you've seen some of my other videos, I usually sketch it with a pencil first and then I color it in. And I wanted to do something a little bit more relaxed today, something a little bit less constrained and potentially more clean in the end, like looking for a little bit of a cleaner, more neat result. So this is basically what I'm doing here. I basically outlined the mug with a light yellow, and then with the same yellow, I'm kind of going over the areas I want to create a little bit of depth and a little bit of shading. So I'm basically doing this vertical strokes like this and leaving the left side of the mug a little bit lighter, and the inside part of the mug where we can see in the back, we're creating the opposite type of shading. So the left side on the inside of the mug is darker, as you can see here, and we're leaving a white light spot on the right side. Here I'm using this a little bit of a darker tone of orange just to intensify the shadows a little bit. And for the drinking side, which could be a coffee, could be a hot chocolate, who knows what this person is drinking, but I'm going with a brown because, you know, brown drinks are usually very cozy. So I'm playing here with these two tones of brown. The first one is a little bit lighter just to set the base color, and then I'm using a darker brown to set a little bit more depth, a little bit more shadows. And then if you are using the blending marker, so that marker that has no color is a great one to create a little bit of steam coming out of the coffee to make it look like it's a little bit warm. Another trick I'm using here, as you can see, I have a little bit of side paper to test the colors out because sometimes they don't exactly come out as they look like outside of the marker. Sometimes a color seems like it's going to be darker and then it's much lighter, or the opposite way, which is the worst if you're trying to go light and then it comes out a little bit too dark because you can't really erase the markers. So this is why I have the side paper to test the colors out beforehand. And our next drawing here is a little stem of leaves. Leaves make everything look prettier, so this is what we're doing here. I felt like this could be a little bit of an easy drawing that add a little bit of fall aesthetics to our fall themed illustrations. So this is basically what I was doing here. And as you can see, these markers that I'm using here, they are actually ink pens with a brush tip. They are great because the brush tip is very thin, very delicate, so you can really create these more delicate lines, as you can see here. The brush tip on alcohol markers is a little bit rougher usually, so you end up getting a little bit thicker strokes. So if you want to do something a little bit more detailed, I super recommend these markers. I'm not being sponsored, but these are super great to add some details. But they are not alcohol markers, so they are not blendable. They are ink based, so you know, you put the color on paper and that's it. There's no blending that you can do with them. But for this stem of leaves, it's kind of perfect because we just want a light, you know, fall shade on our leaves. And this is basically what we did here. Now I'm using a little bit of a darker brown just to add a little bit of differentiation between the leaves. I think that makes interesting a little bit more realistic. Not that you have to do this, but you can. So basically at random, you can pick some leaves to make them a little bit darker. And this is going to create a little bit of depth in your drawing. Here I'm doing the same with the orange, so if you have a color that can add a little tint of vibrance to some of your leaves, not all of them, you can also do that and make some of them or parts of the leaves look a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more saturated in color. And as you can see, they look super cute already. It's such an easy way to make leaves look a little bit more realistic. Next, we're going to draw a pumpkin for obvious reasons. They have to be in this set of drawings because pumpkins are the celebration of fall. And here I am cheating a little bit. I said I wasn't gonna sketch, but I feel like I'm not super familiar with drawing pumpkins, so I kind of need the sketch for this one. So I just used the lightest color I had. It's very light peach color just to outline the pumpkin. And as you can see, it's basically one oval shape and then a few curves on both sides of the oval shape. And then I started with a little bit of a yellow just to set the shapes a little bit more clearly. And now I'm going over it with dark orange just to set out the base color. So I'm using this orange to basically color over everything. So basically the outline is going to look a little bit darker than the base color inside each of these shapes because we outlined it beforehand. And of course, I am trying to leave some white spots to create some highlights. I'm choosing to leave the left side a little bit lighter than the rest, as if the highlights are coming from the left. And then if you have some different tones of orange and yellow, you can kind of play with these tones to start creating a little bit of a more complex color scheme. So I'm using this yellow here just to go over the transition between the orange and the white. And you can also use a brown to intensify the shadows a little bit. The shadows are basically going to be in between each of these curves, especially at the bottom and then at the top. And as I started getting a little bit more comfortable with adding shadows in this pumpkin, I realized that the mug could use a little bit more shadows. So I just went over with the brown and added a little bit more intense shadows over there. And I think it looks so much better. And this is a color that you wouldn't really see so clearly in a pumpkin, but I think it mixes everything together a little bit better. But this is kind of like a peach color, and this peach color helps blend the yellow and the orange in a way that looks a little bit more natural. And again, with the orange and this mustard color, I'm just intensifying the shadows on the mug again. As you can see, the trick to do these little illustrations is to kind of layer the tones, and notice that I'm not using a bunch of different colors. I'm just using a bunch of different tones of the same color. So I have about 2 oranges, 2 yellows, that peach color. So it's the layering of these different tones that create such an interesting color scheme for these elements. Next, I figured we could draw some cute socks. So I'm just drawing the basic shape of socks. As you can see, I made a tiny little mistake here on the left one, but we're just covering that with a base color. This is kind of like a sand color, and we're doing the tops of the socks a little bit thicker. This is such a quick little drawing, and it's just so cute already. And I think the fun part on this one is that you can have fun with creating a little bit of a pattern for your socks. So just play with it. There's no rules on how you should do it. I guess a little traditional way of doing the socks is having the heel part and the toes part a little bit darker like this. You can also make these little lines for the top part where it covers your ankles. I don't even know how to call this, guys. Sorry, I don't know the specific names of the parts of a sock. But yeah, you can basically create a little pattern here, make some geometrical shapes. If you're not really sure how to make this pattern, you can Google some patterns to have inspiration and just play with like different colors and different tones. But I'm trying to keep everything with a fall theme. So this is why I'm still sticking with my oranges and my browns. So this is basically what I'm doing here. I'm creating a little bit of a geometrical shape with lines and dots. Nothing too complex. It's actually super simple, but I think it goes really well with the rest of the illustrations. Next, we're going to do a little bit of a more complex one. We're going to do a maple leaf. This is a very traditional fall item, especially here in Canada. And this is not a very easy leaf to draw. So I'm going to describe it step by step in a way that I think will make more sense, but just observe what I'm doing because sometimes explaining is hard. So basically, you're going to start with a vertical line to mark the main vein of the leaf. Then you're going to add some lines coming out of this main line in a diagonal shape. And I suggest that you do this with a light marker because then all the colors are going to basically cover this and you can add more details in the end. So choose a light color to start with this outline, and you're basically going to almost like a star shaped, right? The top, it kind of looks like a star. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pointy edges, and then you're going to add a few spikes all around the edges of this leaf. I know it's a little bit complicated, but you see what I'm doing, right? And then I'm just covering the whole leaf with this base color. But notice that I didn't cover it super intensely. I can still see the veins of the leaves. So now with a darker brown, we can go over the veins again, just to keep them visible. And for this, it's really nice if you're drawing a leaf that is this small. It's really nice to have this really thin brush pen, because with a thicker brown, with a thicker brush pen, you would not be able to do this amount of detail. So I'm just adding some extra little veins coming from the main 5 veins. And this is starting already to look like a maple leaf. You can also intensify the edges, the pointy edges of the leaf. You don't have to do it through the whole edge, but in some spots it makes sense for you to make them a little bit darker, and this is going to create a little bit of more depth in your leaf. So you're not really outlining the whole leaf again with the brown, but you're choosing some curves and some pointy spots to make them a little bit darker. Another thing you can do is add a little bit of color. So here I'm using that peach tone, which here, because I already had a little bit of a sand color underneath, it's kind of looking like a little bit of orange, and you don't need to color the whole thing, but just randomly choose some spots to cover some areas with this tone. And then from here, you can just layer a few more colors over and over. So the more little tones like this, as you can see, these are all light colors, but once you layer them together, you start creating a little bit more movement to your color scheme. Here I'm using a little bit of yellow to make it a little bit more vivid and a little bit more bright. And you can really play with your colors. There's no right or wrong. As you can see, I'm going over this area closer to the vein a little bit more with these darker colors to create a little bit more depth and add some shadows. And a lot of this coloring is random. As you can see here, we're making the areas around the veins a little bit darker, but other than that, you can kind of play with the layering of the colors to make pattern of colors you would like. Here I'm just intensifying the veins a little bit more again. And this is our little maple leaf. I think it's super cute. Now next, I'm gonna do an amazing drawing. Get ready. This is one of my favorites. We're going to do cherry pie, or I don't know, strawberry rhubarb pie, whatever flavor you want to call this. Okay, so basically you're gonna start with a circle, and for the checkered pattern, you're going to color in the length of the dough. If you've ever made pie, you know what I'm talking about. But this is basically a line, like a strip of dough that you're going to be coloring. I don't know how to explain this, guys. Do you see what I'm doing? You're basically going to color in the length of the dough, and we're gonna make it so it looks like some of these strips are over the other parts. This is really hard to explain, but it will make sense, trust me. As you can see here, I am using this same color, so I'm not going darker. I know it looks like it's coming out darker, but it is the same tone. I'm just intensifying these shadows a little bit, make these strips look like they are going over the other strips. So basically, if you look at one strip by itself, it's going to go over one of them, under one of them, over, under, and then over again. And then it just intercalates with the other strip. Does that make sense? I hope it's making sense. But anyway, the trick to make it look like they're going over or under is to add a shadow underneath the strip that's going over. So as you can see here, I'm adding a few shadows here to create some separation between them. And now that we have the base color for the dough of the pie, we are going to color the insides, so the filling of the pie basically, with this dark burned red. And I'm also adding some details on the socks, just some dots here and there. But back to the pie, you're basically adding some dots over and over, just so that we don't color it super evenly, because it's a pie, so there's going to be some highlights. It's going to be very uneven. So I'm doing dots to create that different combination of colors, and it's not great yet, but this is basically what we're doing so far for the filling of the pie. Now, to make it seem a little bit more realistic, we are going to add some layers of other tones in the filling. So you can play with some grays, you can play with browns, and you can keep doing dots, because this is the closest thing you're going to be able to get to a realistic effect. So with the dark tone, you can also create a little bit of shadows underneath the dough. So like if you have a square of filling that you are coloring, the edges of this square are going to be a little bit darker than the middle where the light is reaching, right? So you're going to add a little bit of darker shadows all around the square, and especially on the corners. You can also use a thin line of brown to go over the edges of the strips of dough. I wouldn't do that with all of them, because if you do it with all of them, it's going to look a little bit more amateur than I assume you would like. So you want to do it to some of them just to create that separation between the top strip and the bottom strip. And you're gonna leave some of them with none of these brown lines. And this is starting to look a little bit more like a pie. I feel like these little brown details make a big difference, because otherwise everything would kind of look like it's on the same level. So the contrast of the brown with the yellow creates a little bit of depth. So I would spend a little bit of time on these details because I think they make a big difference. Now, as you can imagine, when you bake a pie, the dough is gonna look all sorts of beautiful colors. Some parts are going to be a little bit darker, a little bit more burnt, and some parts are going to be a little bit whiter. So we're going to create this effect by layering a little bit of some darker tones into our pie. So again, I'm using this peach color that I've been using everywhere because I think it blends with the yellows so nicely. And as you can see, I'm not going over the whole dough. I'm just picking some little spots here and there, especially where there's a curve, right? We want to create this effect where this strip is going over another strip, so there's going to be a slight curve. So in the lower part of the curve, we're going to make it a little bit darker. And you can also intensify those darker spots with a little bit of a gray, like I'm doing here. Careful with your grays, test them out on a side piece of paper first, because sometimes as alcohol markers, they look like they're going to be really light, and then when you draw it, it's a super dark gray and you won't be able to erase that. So make sure you have a natural light gray for this. And again, I think the game of alcohol markers is layering the tones, so you can go back and forth with the tones you're playing with. Feel free to also intensify the pie feeling as well, and keep layering your colors until you are happy with your results. Now, to make it look super cute, we're gonna make this pie to be laying on top of this like kitchen cloth, like a tea towel or something like that. So this is super easy. You basically just pick a color, just color the whole rectangle that's technically underneath the pie. Feel free to layer a few colors here and there. With the dark brown, you can create a little bit of shadows so that it looks a little bit more realistic. I'm doing this underneath the pie over here, especially a little bit more on the left side. And one thing that's actually super satisfying to do, and it makes it look so much like fabric, is to add some fringe. Is that what it is? A fringe at the bottom. So just add a series of little parallel lines like this. And I think the thinner they are, the better, because then it looks super delicate and super cute. No need to make them perfect. As you can see, they're not all super parallel and super straight and none of that, because if you actually had a towel that looks like this, the fringe would not be looking perfect. So embrace the imperfection. And it's already looking super cute in my opinion. And just to add some final details, we're going to add this checkered pattern on the towel. So I'm using this light orange to add some lines all in one direction and then again on an opposite direction. And you can totally play with this. You can make your checkered pattern a little bit more complex. You can use different tones. You can play with different yellows and different oranges and different reds. And this is our cherry delicious pie for our fall illustrations. And I super love this one. It's actually inspiring me to make a series of little food drawings. Should we do it? Are you guys interested in some food drawings? Let me know what kind of food you would like us to draw and we can come up with some foods. That would be fun. Anyway, here with this brown marker, I always like to intensify the shadows. I always feel like it makes such a big difference on the drawings, and I think they end up looking a little bit more realistic and adds a little bit more depth to the drawing, makes it look a little bit more interesting. This is just my personal opinion. I also love very minimalistic drawings that have no shadows, so this is just my personal opinion and it makes me feel good when I'm drawing. I personally like adding all of this complexity to the drawings, but it's totally up to you if you actually want to do this. You are more than welcome to simplify it and not add as many shadows. Now we're going to be drawing a candle because candles are everything to do with fall in my opinion. And this is going to be kind of like a mason jar style candle with a label around it. So this is basically what I'm doing. I'm using this gray to create these jar and the candle is going to be inside. As you can see, I left the space for the flame empty so that we can create the flame later. Then I'm just coloring the wax part of the candle and also the label with the same sand color. With this darker gray tone, I'm adding a little bit of shadows and making the candle seem a little bit more rounded. So basically the way you do this is to create some shadows over the edges of your jar to make this rounded effect. So basically both on the right and the left side, you're going to add some darker vertical lines along the length of the jar. And because this is one of those jars where you screw the lid in, we want to create that screw effect, if that makes any sense. So on the oval shape on top where the lid would be, you're going to add some more marked lines. If this was a smooth surface, I wouldn't do it so marked like this, but because it's a screw top, then we want to create this extra lines to make it a little bit more intense. And also for the label, you can also make it a little bit more darker on the left side like this. You can, just pick a side to make it darker. Just make sure it matches the jar. But here, because we are just using a white paper in the background, all we have to do is basically to add a little bit of orange at the bottom of the flame, and we can make the flame a really, really light yellow like this. You can also add a little bit of shadows around the wax and leave the middle parts like right under the flame a little bit lighter so that it kind of looks like it's adding a spotlight there to create the light effect of the fire. And this is our candle. Another super easy fall little drawing is glasses. So this is what we're doing here. Some cute little glasses. I don't think all the drawings need to be super complex. So we're doing 2 very round circles and this horizontal line that curves down on both sides like this. And then for the glass part, we can also use a darker tone to make the horizontal lines a little bit darker. And then with a really light color that you can choose, you can just color in inside the glass area like this. I'm using this super light yellow, but just to create some differentiation, and it just looks different than the white from the paper. And this is such a cute little drawing and super easy to do. Next, we're going to do a kettle. One of those loud ones that scream when the water is boiling. So basically you're going to do this kind of an oval shape with a little bit of a flat top, and you're going to have this curved thingy where you hold it with your hand on top. So that's basically just a little line that curves like this. You see what I'm doing, right? It's just so hard to describe this. And I don't know the names of the specific parts of this kettle. Like the part that releases the tea or the hot water. You see what I'm doing. It's hard to describe, guys. But basically, what I can describe might be helpful for you. When you color it, especially if you're using alcohol markers, you're going to be doing it along the movement and the shape of the elements. So because this is curved and because this is kind of like an oval shape on the sides, we're also going to use curves. So instead of you just coloring all vertically or all diagonally inside of it, no, you can just go through the whole space using the curves, following the movement of the shape of this kettle, if that makes sense. So as you can see here, because we did this, because we used these curves, it already looks like it's a curved shape. And I made it a point to make the bottom and the top a little bit darker and leaving the middle, so this horizontal section in the middle of the kettle, a little bit lighter to also create this curved effect. And now that we have the base color of the kettle, we can just make it a little bit more interesting by adding some different tones and making a more interesting color scheme. So basically I'm using this dark brown for the handle, and then I'm using a yellow to add a little bit of a checkered pattern. So just adding some horizontal lines that go along the curve of the kettle. And again, back with our brown pen to adding some shadows at the base of the handle, at the base of the part that releases the water. What is that called? I have no idea. Also underneath the lid, especially on the left side. And again, notice that I am using the curves of the element to help this shadows shape the element. And then with a yellow or a light orange, you can also add a little bit more color, make the tones be a little bit more vivid. And again, this is the fun part. It's basically layering the colors until you get the result you were looking for. I really like doing this illustration with this limited color scheme where we're using just like orange tones and yellow tones. It's actually really fun to have basically different tones of the same colors to work with. I think it's really fun. And to make the shadows a little bit more intense, you can do what I'm doing here. So I'm basically using this, it's kind of like a caramel color, like a dirty yellow tone to intensify the shadows a little bit. Again, I am going over the left side and the right side and basically the edges and leaving the middle part a little bit lighter and following the curves of the kettle. And here I'm using this light gray to create a little bit of steam. So you can just add some fun little shapes coming out of the kettle. And I did the same here for the mug. So this is what we're doing. We're drawing a cup with a bunch of pencils. And I was basically looking at the cup of pencils that was in front of me to draw this. And it's kind of like a groovy cup. And so I have the cup shape here. The top, as you can see, the back, I left it empty so that we can draw the pens and the pencils coming from the bottom. And I added some vertical lines because this is the pattern of the cup I was drawing, but you are more than welcome to make this smooth if you prefer. And now, super simple, there's no secret to this. I'm basically just adding some long rectangular shapes like this to be the pens and the pencils, and it's kind of like a little creative aspect. There's no secret to it. Just pick some different colors that you have available and then draw the pens and pencils in different positions like this. I was also playing with the lids of the pens and making them two-colored sometimes. And then once I was done with the pens and pencils, I finished drawing the cup and especially the back part of the cup and added a little bit of shadows on everything. So again, using the same system we've been using so far, making the inside of the cup a little bit darker and the bottom where we have this strip of like darker tone, I also made it darker a little bit more. Here I'm just using some orange to add a little bit of color to everything, especially on the left and right sides. I also used this light brown to add a little bit more shadows as well. And as you can see, this is that step we all love to do, which is basically layering the colors again and again. And this is our little cup of pens and pencils. Now we're going to do a sunflower because it's missing some botanicals. We just need a flower over here. And sunflowers match our vibe. So this is what we're doing here right now. As you can see, pretty simple stuff. Start with a circle and then you add the petals like this. And then I add the back petals so that they're not like one next to each other, because in reality it's not like that. And then we have some overlaying petals, so some of them are behind, some of them are on top, and then we're going to try to create that effect with the coloring. And we're going to do this by layering some extra colors. So here I'm using a different tone of yellow to go over some of the petals and to make them seem like they are a little bit darker. And as you know, when we make something look a little bit darker than the rest, it looks like it's behind, right? It looks like it's a little bit backwards. So as you can see here, the petals look a little bit better already just by adding some color in some of the petals, not all of them. And for the center of the flower, we're going to start by coloring it with a lighter brown, and we're going to make the outside edges of this circle a little bit darker than the center. You can also use this light brown to add a little bit more shadows in between petals. So you're basically going to add some very thin lines and keep it delicate, because if your lines are too visible, your flower won't look so delicate. They're gonna have a little bit of a rougher effect and you might not want that. You can also use a little bit of stippling on the center of the flower to create a little bit of texture over there. And finally, you can do the stem of the flower. So this is basically a slightly curved line. You can make it a little bit thick, because if you look at a sunflower, this stem is a little bit thick. You can add some leaves like this and keep it simple. We're not trying to do anything super realistic or super elaborate. So you can just play with this leaf, make a pattern if you would like for it, just adding some veins on it just because I think it looks pretty. And here I am doing the stippling around the center circle, as you can see. And I really had fun with this flower, so I figured maybe we could draw some berries. I feel like that's such an easy thing to draw and it's super cute. Basically, pick a berry color. It could be a dark orange or a dark red like I did here, and just make a bunch of dots. And then with a lighter color like I'm doing here with this mustard yellow, you can add the stem. So you're basically connecting all the berries and then adding the leaves to to make a little bit more natural, and leaves just look super pretty. So this is what we're doing here. As you can see, there's no rule, but I'm trying to balance it out where we have berries and where we have leaves so that it's all like a little cohesive drawing. Now, just like we did with our first stem of leaves, I am using this light gray to make the leaves a little slightly bit darker. And with the brown, we can add a little bit of shadows on the stems and on some of the leaves as well. So I'm basically going over the veins of the leaves and on a few spots along the stems. So I'm choosing the left side should be my shadow side. So mostly on the left side of the stems, I'm going over with a very thin brown line, and that just adds a little bit of depth to your drawing as well. And I think it looks super cute. And to wrap this illustration up, we're going to draw a moon because I think it adds a little bit of magic to our drawing session today. And it's also super easy and quick to draw, and it just makes everything super pretty. So basically, as you can see, all you have to do is draw 2 letter C's, and one of them is a little bit smaller. And after you have the main shape down, you can just go over the edges a little bit so that you make sure it's the right shape. And this was our fall drawing session. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If there's any tutorials you would like to see, please let me know in the comments. I am always looking at your comments and I'm always needing ideas for videos, so I would love to know what you would like to see next. Also, if you're interested in my work and you love drawing with ink pens, or you want to learn how to draw with ink pens, I just released my book. You can get it everywhere where you buy books, and there's a link in the description as well. In this book, I share all of my favorite techniques on how to draw with ink pens. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps my channel, and it's super motivating for me and really helps me to continue doing this for the long run. And this is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!